Okay, welcome everyone to our second SpedNet webinar of the year. We're pleased to have you joining us. I'm Eve Kessler, co-founder and executive director of SpedNet, and Carolina Corrigan, our co-president, will be hosting this webinar. SpedNet was created over 20 years ago as a nonprofit to educate and empower parents of students with special needs to become their children's best advocates. In addition to our webinars and presentations, we have a terrific and easily accessible website with videos of all our presentations and webinars sorted by topic and speaker, as well as related articles and materials. We have published an excellent interactive guide to special services, bringing knowledge to the table, how to be an effective advocate for your child, free on our website with paperbacks available for purchase. If you have a student in the Wilton Public Schools, you may receive a paperback copy free of charge. This year, the Connecticut State Department of Ed has implemented a new IEP form and data collection system. Today, attorneys Jeff Forte and Jill Hornig of the Forte Law Group will walk you through the new IEP form page by page and explain what you need to know to be an effective member of your child's IEP team. Jeff Forte, founding member of the Forte Law Group, has dedicated his entire career to serving the Connecticut community, advocating and negotiating on behalf of his clients at PPT meetings, negotiations, hearings, mediations, and trials. Jill Hornig discovered the world of special education when her oldest child was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder 20 years ago. Since then, she has advocated for her children with various levels of needs and worked with special ed attorneys in Connecticut and New York, providing project assistance, autism expertise, and critical support in due process proceedings and mediations. If you, attorneys Forte and Hornig will be answering questions after the presentation. The best way to ask your questions is to type them into the Q&A. Please do not use the chat. It's hard for us to monitor. If you find our information and support helpful, please feel free to donate to SpedNet. We're a nonprofit organization and all your donations go directly into programming. A couple of ground rules: be mindful that this is an open forum and that the presentation is being recorded, so we cannot guarantee confidentiality. You may not want to reveal any private information in your questions. The webinar videos will be sent out by email after today and posted on our website and YouTube channel for viewing whenever you like. And any information provided in this presentation by the speakers or by SpedNet board is for general informational purposes only and is not intended to be legal or therapeutic advice. Lastly, this webinar is presented in partnership with the Newtown Sped PTA. Thank you, Jeff and Jill. We turn it over to you.
Thank you, Eve, and good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Let's get right into sharing the PowerPoint here. All right, Eve, can you see that? We good?
Yes. Perfect.
Okay, great. So first, I'd like to welcome all of you. Good morning. Thank you for SpedNet for allowing us to present on making sense of Connecticut's new IEP page by page. I do just want to underscore that SpedNet is a nonprofit, and any support that you can provide them by getting out their information or by helping to fund them would be incredibly appreciated, because the information that they provide is really unprecedented and unparalleled. So I'd like to thank them for allowing Jill Hornig and I to present on such an important topic. It's incredibly timely, and hopefully we're going to get to all of your questions and we'll get answers to what you need to know. So we're going to be talking today about the new IEP, and we're going to be going through it page by page. All right. So first, Jill, would you like to do the honor of introducing yourself first?
Sure. My name is Jill Hornig. I've been an attorney since 1993, and I've been working in special education law since about 2002. I've recently, the past couple of years, joined Jeff in his in Forte Law Group. It's been a transformative experience for me. You know, we passionately believe in representing children with disabilities. You know, as my introduction stated, I have 3 children with varying levels of needs. So I'm experienced both from an attorney perspective and from a parent perspective. I think I bring that, unique perspective to the table for anyone that we represent, and certainly in situations like these. I've been where you are at the other side of the PPT table. So I think I bring that unique perspective to all educational efforts that we do.
And a little bit about me. I founded Forte Law Group really with a mission to help as many children with disabilities as I possibly can. We really like to think of ourselves as a community service-based law firm. I also have a child on an IEP with dyslexia under the eligibility category of specific learning disability. I also practice as a child advocate, as a juvenile defense attorney. I do expulsion defense, manifestation hearings. I'm a former executive board member of SEEK of Connecticut, former state appointed surrogate parent through the Connecticut State Department of Ed. I frequently present for COPA, the Council of Parents, Advocates, and Attorneys, and I serve on their Attorney Development Committee. And lastly, I have a national podcast in which Jill was, I think, a guest on it on how to organize your child's FERPA records.
Yep.
But Let's Talk Sped Law is a national podcast. It's in all 50 states. It has about 35,000 followers. So it's just more information in case you want to delve into some of the legalities of special education law. So as Eve mentioned, today there's a couple disclaimers, right? This is not to be misunderstood to be legal advice. If you do put a question in the chat, know that this is being recorded and it is going to be posted onto SpedNet's website. So for purposes of confidentiality, you may want to pose your questions in a way that will not disclose you or your child if you're having an issue with your district.
Also, please don't put it in the chat. Make sure you put it in the Q&A so we can read it. Okay, sorry, Jeff.
Thanks, Eve. So put it in the chat, not the Q&A.
No, the
put it in the
Q&A, not the chat.
Put it in the Q&A, not the chat. Got it. Okay.
There you go.
And also, as far as disclaimers goes, there's going to be some unknowns. Okay. This is a fluid, evolving transformation that all districts are going through right now with their migration to the new program. And depending on what district you're in, it may be a great experience. It may be a confusing or unpleasant experience. Some districts are using both programs, both softwares, the existing software as well as the new software at the same time. So they're not literally dumping every single student's educational records in at once, but we'll kind of get into that. So there's some unknowns and there's some disclaimers. Jill, why don't we start with just the baseline, going through some common acronyms that we're going to be going through today.
Sure. As probably most parents know, special education law is full of acronyms. We refer to it as alphabet soup. So you're probably familiar with most of these, but the IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That is the federal statute that oversees special education law. FAPE, which is what school districts are supposed to be providing to your student. That's a free and appropriate public education. LRE, least restrictive environment. The purpose of special education is to provide a student with the specialized instruction, supports, and services in the least restrictive environment that enables the student to make progress. So least restrictive environment, school districts might often say, well, a general education class in a public school would be the least restrictive environment. But if a student is not able to make progress in that setting, then that's not the least restrictive environment for that student. And so, it's very individualized what LRE means. IEP, Individualized Education Program, that's the document that we're talking about today. PPT, which is a unique term in Connecticut, it's Planning and Placement Team. Other states refer to that team process with different terms and different acronyms. PLOP, present levels of performance. On the old IEP form, it's present levels of academic achievement and performance, I think. And then Connecticut SEDS, Connecticut Special Education Data System. That is the new system that is in place in Connecticut. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a couple of slides.
Thanks, Jill. So Connecticut SEDS has arrived. It is here. Okay. And as Jill mentioned, the acronym for CT SEDS stands for Connecticut Special Education Data System. Know that CT SEDS is statewide and it is web-based. And you, the parent, will have an access portal in which you will be able to access your child's IEP, as well as other related documents to the IEP. So it serves as two things, really. On the parental side, it serves as document storage, if you will, an archive of your child's school records that both you and your school team could tap into to review. On the school district side, CT SEDS is an interactive, dynamic software program that has drop downs and various windows that are selected dependent upon where you are in the phase of your child's IEP stage, in the phase of where you are with evaluations, and so forth. And we're going to actually show you some slides of what the district administrators will see when they are poking around within CT SEDS. Okay.
Now, Jeff, I just want to sort of ask a question for the parents who might be already familiar with the program that districts currently use, or many of them use, is IEP Direct. Yep. Now, is this going to replace IEP Direct in terms of the software interface that districts use when creating an IEP?
Yes. So the question again for everyone is CT SEDS going to replace IEP Direct? And the answer is yes. In the long run, it is going to replace IEP Direct. Now, after speaking with various superintendents, various directors of special education, board attorneys, other parent attorneys, right now, some districts have made the switch completely from IEP Direct to CT SEDS. They're in the process of doing that. Other districts have renewed their annual subscription license to IEP Direct with their own district dollar budget for this entire school year, and also are using CT SEDS. So they're easing the student IEP migration slowly, whereas other districts over the summer literally brought in as many staff as they can to data migrate all of their the district's children's IEPs over the summer from IEP Direct to CT SEDS. So there isn't really one right or wrong migration. I think it depends on the number of folks in your district, the number of employees that can dump this data. But the other point that I want to answer to Jill's question here is that it is not a dynamic data dump, meaning that each district has to manually enter all of the information from IEP Direct into CT SEDS. So it actually takes a human with a keyboard to word for word, IEP for IEP, to migrate it over, because the custom fields do not sync up between the two softwares. So it is somewhat of a data nightmare, which is why we're suggesting in some slides here that you really make sure that you have ownership of your child's school records before they're migrated over to CT SEDS, because there's just some human error that can happen. where some things might not be migrated over correctly. So here's some really good things to know, just kind of in general about CT SEDS and the direction as to why this was done. And the Connecticut Examiner, which is a really good website that often follows special education reporting, published an article on September 4th. Oh, it should be 2022, not 2020. Sorry, we'll fix that in the final slide. About things to know about special ed and CT SEDS. So statewide, it's going to be used by all districts for all 84,000 identified currently special education students across the state. And as we previously mentioned on the prior slide, there is going to be a parent portal access in which parents will be invited by their district to access their child's IEP online, along with any and all related documents relating to the IEP. Now, it's going to be translated into 10 different languages, depending on the primary language of the parent. Now, full disclosure, this is a little fluid. That doesn't mean that your child's evaluations conducted by your school team will be translated into your primary language, but that the standard documents that are already pre-populated within CT SEDS should be. Okay. Annually, CT SEDS is going to cost the state, the Connecticut State Department of Education, $1 million. And it's being paid for by a federal IDEA grant. So it's at no cost to your public school district. So there's a savings, there's an incentive there. And, you know, I don't think it's that much money when they were using IEP Direct. I think it was like $20,000 or $25,000 a year. But that is funding that now can be reallocated to something else. And the best part about CT SEDS is, well, at least in theory, is that it's supposed to relieve the burden on the school district of gathering and reporting data annually to the Connecticut State Department of Education. So what does this mean? In IEP Direct, school districts would have to manually run reports to show that they're in compliance with the deadlines and dates of referral eligibility timelines and annual and triennial IEP deadlines. They don't have to do that anymore. It's all automatically dynamic. It automatically syncs. The state can simply run a report on the district themselves without the district having to do anything. So that's really a benefit of this, is once all the data is entered in, it's really dynamic, where anyone, school district or state, can run a report. We don't have to wait for districts to do their annual feed, if you will, to the Connecticut State Department of Ed. Okay, so are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? When does the switch occur into CT SEDS? Well, for new IEPs that were created after July 1st, 2022, all new IEPs that were created after this date are already in CT SEDS. So what that means is as of today's date, let me see what's today, October 19th, 2022. If you have not had your annual IEP meeting yet, okay, but you're going to be having an IEP meeting, but it's not an annual IEP meeting, your district will still be in IEP Direct until your child's next annual meeting. So let me repeat that. we're on October 19th right now. Let's say you're having a program review meeting in November of this year, but your child's annual is until February of 2023. Your November program review IEP meeting will not mandatorily need to migrate to CT SEDS. But if your child's annual is in February, it will switch over to CT SEDS. Okay, so Jill, why don't you share our parental tip here as to what we think everyone should be doing before the data dump here.
So as Jeff said, the districts that adopted wholesale CT SEDS over the summer had people come in because the custom fields there's no automated translation from IEP direct to CT SEDS. So all of that information has to be input manually. If you are getting your child's documents through CT SEDS now, we recommend that you, and for everybody, we recommend that you file a FERPA request for your education records and absolutely compare your old IEP with a new IEP to make sure the information has been migrated accurately, because there's so much information to migrate, and it seems as if much of it is done manually. It's subject to human error. Even if it was ported automatically or through programming, it's still subject to error. So really it's up to you as the parent to monitor the switch, monitor the information, and just ensure that the new documents are completely accurate. And the best way to do that is to file a FERPA request to get all of your education records to date so that you have everything. Just on, worst case scenario, once IEP Direct goes away, if information is lost, you have it in your files. That's not to say the districts will do that purposely, but errors happen, technology glitches happen, and who knows what the information retention policies and abilities are of IEP Direct once the contracts expire. That's just our practical tip for how to preserve your students' information and documents, and really to make sure that the migration is accurate.
Thanks, Jill. Now, for those of you that don't know what FERPA means, or you don't know how to file a FERPA request, you could follow up with SpedNet. You can Google it. It's very easy to do. There's various templates and formats. You can contact us. FERPA stands for Family Education Rights Privacy Act. We're not going to go into it too much more than that, because you can go ahead and look up what all of that means. But the point is to get your child's records before the migration into CT SEDS, just so you've got it for your records. Okay, resources. Now, we've put together a very comprehensive, hyperlinkable list of resources for you. So when you're going through this and you're watching this, re-recorded and so forth, Jill and I really would encourage you to bookmark all of these websites, okay? Because they're incredibly informative, and this is just the beginning. The state continues to post more modules and videos, okay? So one of the reasons why we're presenting on this today for SpedNet is because we wrote a blog about it. So there's a blog on our website, fortelawgroup.com, Connecticut's new IEP, an overview by a special education attorney. The Connecticut State Department of Ed has new IEP resource links. There's also, if you could see my mouse here, the new IEP template is actually up. You can download the template. You need to know the template. The template will help with the phase of discussion in your IEP meetings. There's also a side-by-side comparison of the current IEP versus the new IEP, and you can compare the two, and we're going to get into that. There's accommodations and modification examples that are going to dynamically be pre-populated that you might not necessarily know about, but that you should know about. There's two videos that the bureau chief for the Connecticut State Department of Ed Special Ed Division, Brian Klemkowitz, posted and hosted. and they're actually pretty good. So we put them on here. These are these two links here. The Connecticut State Department of Ed also has IEP training modules. And there's training modules for parents, and there's training modules for staff. In my opinion, I think that parents should have equal access to both the parents and the staff training modules. I don't know if parents will have access to the staff training modules yet. That remains to be seen. But we've taken all of the parent training modules already in advance of today's presentation. And then there are videos on the IEP preview series. So, you know, an initial referral for special ed, a diagnostic placement PPT, a manifestation PPT, and so forth. And then there's documents and templates that you can go through. So bookmark these, okay? All right, so before we talk about what's going to be in the new IEP, let's first talk about what's not going to be in the new IEP. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute. Why are we talking about what's not in the IEP when Jill and Jeff are talking about what the new IEP is? Well, that's because there's a lot that's going to be taken out of the new IEP. Things like prior written notice is no longer going to be part of the new IEP document itself. Things like the planning and placement team summary is no longer going to be part of the IEP itself. It's optional.
And Jeff, let me just chime in this for everyone who has an existing IEP. This would be the minutes section, or in the old IEP, you had the recommendations box at the top and then the minutes or the summary box at the bottom. That summary is no longer in the IEP document itself. That's what we're talking about here.
Right. And all of these within this, when you go to access this PowerPoint, all of these link to the standalone separate documents. Okay. So as Jill was mentioning, right, the page 2 list of recommendations and the planning and placement team summary, which were optional in the current IEP, are now outside of the new IEP and CT SEDS, and they continue to be optional. All right. The least restrictive environment checklist, that was not part of the IEP before. It continues to not be part of the IEP. And then the summary of performance checklist, that is only for students that are about to exit out of special education because they may be graduating from the 12th grade, or they may be exiting out of special education because they are now, they've reached their 22nd birthday. And there is a summary of performance exit report that has to be done for those students. And you could find all of the templates at once right here. So now we're just going to kind of go a little bit more granular, and we're going to go into the documents that are not part of the current IEP, that are not part of the new IEP. And the first one is prior written notice. Essentially, prior written notice, as most of you may know who you have a child with an IEP, is provided to parents at a PPT meeting where the team is going to propose something, or they're refusing something, or they're initiating a change or an action. They're changing the child's IEP eligibility identification. They're refusing or granting an evaluation. They're refusing or granting an IEE. They're refusing or granting a change in educational placement. All of these things fall under a procedural safeguard that you have as a parent under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, otherwise known as prior written notice. So prior written notice, and this is just the first page, there's 2 pages of it, is the first thing that will not be part of the new IEP. But obviously, it's still important for you to make requests at your child's IEP. And if they are granted or denied, you want to make sure they're appropriately memorialized on the prior written notice page.
And also just to chime in here, you also want to make sure that you not only ask that the PPT memorialize whatever the action is that's either taking place or that they refuse, and you also want to request a copy of this document since it's no longer in the IEP itself. You know, we would expect that the district would provide it with an IEP, but it's, you know, best practice to specifically request that they provide you with a copy of this document in addition to the IEP.
That's right. And because this is a related document to the IEP, it should be part of your child's record as a related document when you get parent portal access into CT SEDS. Okay. So the next document that is not in the IEP is the planning and placement team record of meeting. And this is what the document looks like. I think that everyone should be requesting that the record of meeting be completed. All right, so when you're kicking off your IEP meetings, you're going to want to ask, again, if it's an annual, your child's next upcoming annual will be in CT SEDS. But if you're not having an annual PPT, any other PPT other than an annual, you're going to want to ask, is this meeting being conducted is this IEP meeting being conducted in CT SEDS? If so, oh, okay. Well, then I'm requesting that we have a record of meeting. All right, and that's what this looks like. The other thing that you're going to want to request is a summary of the PPT. Now, this is optional, but this is very important because this is basically kind of the diary of what was covered and the conversations that were had. And if you are recording your IEP meetings, then you're going to want to make sure that the record that the recording that you did mirrors what is done in the optional summary of PPT. Now, here's where it gets, interesting and everything. So let's say these are optional, right? Let's say the district, you make the request that the district write up a summary of PPT and a PPT record of meeting, and the district says no. So you now just have two prior written notices that need to be memorialized on the prior written notice page that the district refused to do a PPT record of meeting and a summary of PPT. And it'll be interesting to see what their reasoning is as to why they're refusing to do that, since the whole point of the PPT meeting is to collaborate and to make sure that everyone's on the same page. So
Jeff,
yeah.
I actually have a question. If you could go back to the prior written notice.
Yep.
From a parent perspective, so you're asking the district to create the record of meeting and create the summary, and the district says no. Theoretically, how would the district document that refusal on prior written notice if it's not an initiation or a change? Because those are the only two options in that document.
That's a great question. That's a great question. And depending on, the vernacular, I suppose, that you are specifying at the PPT, the district can simply say, well, this isn't something that needs to be memorialized in prior written notice because we're not making a change to your child's IEP. But if you are having a disconnect and there is significant miscommunication between parent and school team, then I would strongly urge families to have put on prior written notice. The parents have requested and the district has denied a summary of PPT. The parent has stated that there's a miscommunication but the district is still saying no to trying to alleviate that miscommunication by having the summary of PPT. But that is a good question though, Jill. I think that's the best way we can answer it. I don't know, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, just from a practical standpoint, as a parent, if you're sitting in a PPT and you're saying, I want this, documented on prior written notice, and the district is telling you, well, we don't have to, because it's not initiating or changing anything about the IEP, it's simply documentation. Absolutely make a note for yourself, document it yourself, send an email after the meeting to everyone that attended the meeting and say, that document that you requested that they provide a summary. They refused. I always take my own notes. In the past, I've always compared my notes to, even when I didn't record a meeting, I tend to take pretty accurate notes. And so I would always compare my notes to the summary that I got and clarify with the district anything that I felt was inaccurate.
Right.
So I would encourage parents to do that. Take your own notes. And if they refuse to provide a summary, then, you send an email or send a letter to make sure that it's part of your child's education record, saying, I want this added to my child's education record. This is my summary of the meeting and what was discussed. And I note that the district, refused to create a summary and refused my request to put it on prior written notice. And
Right.
that way it becomes part of your child's education record anyway.
Right. And I suppose too, I would have them check off the provision of FAPE as the reason for the refusal, because a disconnect and miscommunication between you and your child's school team could amount to a substantive or procedural violation of FAPE. So I would probably click on, I would want them to request under actions proposed refused. Under 3, I would want, if you can see my mouse, the provision of FAPE. That's what I would be marking off on that. So moving on, least restrictive environment checklist. The checklist isn't changing, and it wasn't part previously of the Connecticut IEP and Connecticut IEP Direct, but it remains a separate document. And least restrictive environment is a procedural checklist that typically should be gone through at every IEP meeting to ensure your child's being educated on a continuum of an appropriate least restrictive environment. And there's essentially 5 continuums, but we could save that for another day. But you can look up LRE for more information on that. And then the summary of performance page, there are 3 pages to it. We just put the first page on. Summary of performance page is required for each student with an IEP whose IEP ends upon them graduating from high school or when they exceed out of the eligibility age to receive a FAPE upon their 22nd birthday. It's called an SOP, or a summary of performance.
So Jeff, just to ask a question again from a parent perspective, is this document used for a child within K through 12 who is exited out of special education due to performance or changing needs?
When if the trajectory of the child on an IEP is that they're going to graduate from 12th grade, their senior year, then at the final PPT meeting within their 12th grade, an SOP should be completed at the IEP meeting.
Okay.
If they're exiting out anywhere between post 12th grade up to their 22nd birthday, whenever they exit out there, which, there could be contentiousness as to when they should exit out, which you can invoke stay put and everything like that. But yes, this is the exit interview, if you will, when a child matriculates out and exits out of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act.
Okay, but this does not apply to a student, say, who in 5th grade no longer needs special education services and maybe is served after that by a 504 accommodation plan or is exited out of special education entirely.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Instead, they would be using the IEP or moving it to a 504 or, general ed, SRBI, so forth. And by the way, that brings me to a good point, Jill. CT Seds will also include, 504 plans and other related educational offerings as well. We're really focusing in this PowerPoint on the IEP, but there are other ancillary related programming needs that'll be in there as well. So that's a good question that came in. So just a real quick refresher for parents. You should know this. If you don't, you should read Autism Speaks, the IEP guide. This is a really good thing. You can Google it. Okay, right down here. So this is your child's IEP timeline. All of us as parents have gone through it. We continue to go through it, right? So you first have your request for evaluation to determine special education eligibility. Then your child and your team prepare your child for evaluations. The evaluations are conducted. You then get all the evaluations because to request them 3 to 5 days in advance under FERPA. So you're prepared for that initial review of the evaluations. You hold that initial IEP meeting. Your child is then determined. The eligibility is determined of your child's needs. And then an IEP, if they're determined eligible, is created. And then there's data and progress monitoring of the IEP. And then you have the annual IEP meeting with updates. You can have a PPT meeting whenever you want, but at a minimum, it's an annual. And then you have the periodic reevaluations, including triennial evaluations, which are every 3 years. So this is the overall IEP timeline. IEP basics. This is the wheel of where your child goes. So we pick any spot here, but if we go with the top, evaluations are conducted. The evaluations then inform your child's present levels of academic and functional performance, which then, assuming they meet the eligibility requirements for an individualized education plan, the team develops specific, or they're supposed to develop, specific and measurable goals and objectives and related services that are tied to your child's programming are also developed. And then there's progress monitoring. All right. And you keep going through this every year and every 3 years. All right. So these are the IEP basics. Now I share this with you because this is what your school team is going to see when they are in the software of CT Seds. Okay. So if we go with the first, round over here, you have the referral. So again, referral, the referral's been made. So they click off referral. And everything in the referral box needs to be completed by your school team. Otherwise, they cannot advance the software to the next box. Okay, so it's not like they can kind of cheat or poke around and skip. These are mandated fields, folks, that have to be completed in order to advance. Okay, kind of like a video game, so to speak. All right, so then you go to PPT1, where you're building and proposing the evaluations that are going to inform your child's needs. The evaluations are designed. Consent is sent, notice of consent, right? Do we need any additional evaluations like a diagnostic placement or something? Then the evaluations are conducted, and then determination of eligibility is made and related documents. And if you want more information on this, or you want to see the video and the PowerPoint on the referral phase, just click right here because we've got it for you. Okay, there's like 30 slides just on this slide alone that are really informative. So this is just a different angle. This is another part of the IEP process where your child has an IEP. So your child has an IEP and you're having an IEP meeting. And pop quiz, what are all of you requesting right out of the gate when you're going to your first CT SEDS IEP meeting? Summary of a PPT summary and a PPT record summary. You're requesting these things be done, even though they're optional. And if there's a refusal, you're asking it be put on prior written notice. All right. What's interesting is they've front-loaded the special considerations page, which we'll get to. I really like that the special considerations page is the first thing that your children, that your team talks about regarding your child, because we need to figure out what considerations need to be made in order to develop goals and objectives. So this is the phase. All right, then you go through present levels of performance, annual goals. If you're talking about transition services, that would be gone through. Related services, removal from gen ed, district and state testing, PPT recommendations, and then the creation of the IEP and the creation of the prior written notice. And all of this occurs dynamically during the IEP meeting. Now, whether your team has been trained to go through this yet, I don't know, right? You're going to have to figure that out. You could probably FOIA your district's training on this to see what members of the school teams have been trained on this, but it's coming. It's coming at your child's next annual IEP meeting. So you're going to be really prepared because you're going to know all this. And you could say, all right, when are we getting to related services? Are we there yet? Right? Because you can go through all of this. All right. So now we really get into the presentation. How are we doing on time? Oh boy. With a page by page of the IEPs, and we'll kind of blaze through this.
Yeah, Jeff, I would say let's just go through the slides because people can look at this more at their leisure, maybe with an IEP in front of them so they can see sort of how it'll translate. And I think we should just get into the new IEP form and what that looks like.
Sure. Okay, perfect. So this essentially puts each page of the current IEP compared to the new IEP. And thank you to the state. They did this. We didn't do this. We just dumped it into here. But just some things to note. On page 1 of your current IEP, the 13 or so eligibility categories are no longer listed on the new IEP. So for parents that are experiencing a new IEP without the knowledge of the old IEP, you should know what the eligibility categories are, go through the worksheets. The reason for the IEP meeting also isn't like a drop down, it's not listed. So those are things to know about. We're just going to kind of go through. These are some minor formatting changes on this. Again, PPT summary and prior written notice, not applicable because they're no longer part of the new IEP. They're separate standalone documents. What I really like about the new IEP is that each goal and objective is tied to present levels of performance, is tied to academic achievement, is tied to student and parental concerns, all on the same page. So you don't have to like flip to goals and objectives and then look at present levels of performance and parental concerns. It's all right there on the same page per goal and objective. So yeah, we're going to blaze through these, Jill, right? So now these are all the comparisons, all right? We're now going to get into what the new IEP looks like page by page. All right, so first, visually, it's not landscaped. it's portrait when you go to print it. All right, which is good because if you're 3-hole punching it, you know that the dates of the IEP meeting get knocked out when you're 3-hole punching your kid's IEP, right? So if you're creating a binder. So this is the first page, and it goes through all of the people that are present, the reason for the meeting. Again, note, reason for meeting on the old IEP, it would state all the reasons: program review, annual review, manifestation determination review, triennial, initial eligibility for special education. We don't have all those right now. All right, and primary disability, it doesn't list all 13 either. So just know what they are.
And just to one more point about that is that when you had all of the reasons for the meeting, oftentimes there would be 2 or 3 reasons checked. It could be determine eligibility, review evaluations. It could be review and revise an annual review, or, there were always potentially multiple reasons for the meeting checked. I don't know that the districts are going to have the option to choose multiple reasons for the meeting. So if there's if there's a specific reason that the parents are requesting a meeting, I would ask that be put in the summary. They might choose reason for meeting parent request, but that's something that parents can, again, request more information to be put in the summary.
Right, and that's a really good example, Jill, the reason for meeting. We had just the other day a meeting, PPT meeting, and the notice that was generated said that it was to review, to develop an IEP. But in fact, it was develop an IEP and do a manifestation determination. But they were only allowed to pick one. So we knew it was a manifestation, but the notice that was sent didn't include it. And we made a big issue about it, saying, well, look, in IEP and CT said you can't click both. So it was a problem, and we sorted it out. But that's exactly right. Some of these fields, you can't click multiple things. So
and that raises 5-day notice concerns for parents. Parents are supposed to get 5 days notice of the meeting, and if there are multiple purposes for the meeting but they only get notice of one purpose, potentially their parents are getting ambushed without the requisite notice. So that's just something to be aware of. The PPT, the school district, may ask you to waive your notice if you feel that you were ambushed and you are not prepared to address that second purpose, then don't waive the notice.
Right. So you really want to make sure you look at your notice of PPT, because if your child's IEP is already migrated over to CT SEDS, there could be issues in the notice if it wasn't populated correctly with the fields. Okay. So this is this special considerations page that we were talking about. This is now the second page of the new IEP. And, we really like it. It makes your team think about special considerations. Now, we just, in this PowerPoint, for purposes of example only, we chose behavior, because oftentimes behavior could be an impetus to building an appropriate IEP. So one of the questions that they ask is, does the student exhibit behaviors that impede learning for self or others? Yes or no? So if it's yes, then they have to develop a goal or goals and objectives in the IEP to address behavior, and or a behavioral intervention plan based on a functional behavior assessment. So they just can't develop the BIP, as we know, without conducting the FBA. They have to do the FBA because that's what's required of them. All right. Now, again, if you'll indulge us with this example, and by the way, you could find this on this module, series 5 through the CT SEDS preview series. This is what your team will see if you're going through special factors and you have a child that's exhibiting challenging behavior. They'd have to click yes. Then they'd have to click on what is required. Okay, so this is where you want to know, well, yes, if I have a child that's exhibiting behavior, I want goals and objectives. What are the goals and objectives? Give them to me 3 to 5 days in advance of the meeting. And you want a behavior intervention plan based on an FBA. All right, so this is what they would see. And then the FBA and the BIP would be uploaded to your parent portal access. Okay, now this again, see, it says if a behavior intervention plan was clicked, guess what, folks? Your team now has to attach the BIP right there in CT SEDS. See, attach. It's pretty cool. All right. Now, I just had to throw this in here. Jill and I were looking at this last night. So this is a reference guide to prior written notice actions. Okay, and here's the link to it, and here's the scenario. It says the PPT recommends conducting an initial or 3-year triennial evaluation. And read what the notes say here. It says, Jill, do you want to read it here?
Sure. This is, and again, this is the state giving guidance to school districts. Due to a Second Circuit court decision, questions exist whether FBAs are considered evaluations pursuant to the IDEA. The BSA, the Bureau of Special Education, has not yet issued guidance on this issue. For now, we recommend that you continue, the school district, continue with the practice in your district and any legal advice provided by your legal counsel. So what does this mean? This means the state is encouraging and in fact telling school districts with respect to FBAs to talk to their attorneys.
So even if you don't have an attorney, or even if you don't have an advocate, and you're going to an initial or a triennial evaluation where behavior is impacting your child's education, and you request an FBA, functional behavior assessment, the state is encouraging your district to contact their lawyer to determine whether the FBA should be part of the initial or triennial evaluation due to a botched Second Circuit decision, which held in Connecticut that FBAs are not an evaluation under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So I just find it not appropriate that the state's already suggesting district lawyers get involved to answer questions to a team if the parents aren't bringing lawyers and advocates of their own. It's not appropriate to be suggesting this in the reference guide to parents. All right. All right. So now we go on to present levels of performance, and we'll wrap up really quick here. Present levels of performance where you're tying in parent and student input. And, you no longer have just like, one little tiny squibble of sentences that you can put in. This will auto expand, and, you could still send your parental or student concerns in advance of the PPT meeting and ask that those concerns be attached or dumped into this field right here per goal and objective.
And so, Jeff, I just want to point out, you brought up before, but I just want to point out for parents, this format enables you as a parent to see each area of need discreetly, right? So the old IEP format, you had the chart that had present levels of performance for academic reading or English language arts, and then academic math, and then academic other areas, and then behavioral and speech and, you know, communication, OTPT, fine motor, gross motor. And then you would have to flip pages. That was the present levels and strengths and concerns and how it impact the student. Then you'd have to flip pages to the goals and objectives, and which area did that goal? Was that an academic goal? Was that a communication goal? And then flip to how is it being serviced? Now in this format, you're putting the concerns, right? The present levels of performance along with concerns and strengths and impacts on the same page as how that concern is going to be addressed. So say if you have a speech, you know, a pragmatic speech concern. So the student's strength is the student is very verbal, but misses social cues, right? That's the concern. So you're going to have a goal that's going to address pragmatic social skills, whether it's turn taking or eye contact, or, you know, however the team is going to address that with objectives, and adding the core standards that are aligned to the goal. So what is the ultimate, how, you know, what is the ultimate sort of standard that you're trying to reach, and what related services are going to apply? So that's where your speech services are going to be listed. So I feel like for parents, this is easier to read in terms of your child's needs, because you'll see this is the need, this is the goal, these are the goals and objectives addressing the need, these are the standards that we're applying, you know, based on Connecticut Common Core standards, and this is the related service that's going to address this goal. And I think having that all in one area is really going to be helpful for parents in terms of being able to track and understand how the school and how the team is addressing your child's needs in each domain.
Right. That's exactly right, Jill. You know, I think it's important for parents to get into the mindset of working within the new CT SEDS program, because you're tying your parental concerns with present levels of performance, with strengths and weaknesses, and with goals and objectives. Now, a couple things with this. Number one, it falls short in a couple ways.
Yeah.
Temporarily. The Connecticut core standards aligned to this goal, according to my knowledge, is not going to be rolled out until next school year, like the 2023-2024 school year. So you may hear crickets with developing the core standards that align to your child's goal. Now, other districts are already doing this, okay? But they don't need to roll it out right now. The other thing is you need to know, parents need to know what the evaluation methods and the progress monitoring schedule is going to be. Mm-hmm. In the old IEP or in the current IEP, if you were to go to any goal and objective page, at the very bottom, it gives you the evaluation methods, you know, pre and post line data, teacher observation, work samples, you know, student self-assessment or quizzes, work products, right? Keep an old IEP, because you should be having a say in what the evaluation procedure is. And we really want it to be more data-driven more than anything. And then the frequency of the progress monitoring is important to know as well. So,
and and I think there's, you know, we've talked about some fields where data options are limited. I don't know that, and you know, this is something that we'll have to monitor on an ongoing basis, but the evaluation procedure, not sure that they can have 2 or 3 different options. In other words, in the old IEP, there was a letter and a number, and there were usually 2 or 3 different, and then they could input 4 out of 5 trials, 80%, something like that. I'm not sure that they have that ability to really use to identify more than just one. I'm not sure what the drop down options will be, if that is in fact a drop down menu.
Right, right. And, on that note, right, I mean, we're always trying to forecast concerns, right? What we should not be hearing at IEP meetings is, well, CT SEDS doesn't allow us to do that.
Right.
Because you cannot let this program outweigh the uniqueness and the customability that your child needs to be delivered a free, appropriate public education. So if CT SEDS is not comporting with drop downs and dynamic custom fields the way it was built by the state, then we as parents need to be sharing this feedback with folks like SpedNet Wilton, who could do something, SpedNet, excuse me, that could do something about it, with your school districts and with the state, because they're looking for parental feedback. This is just the first go around. I'm sure we can update it if there's enough of a voice from the parental special education community. So, you would go through the rest of the goals. They're all enumerated. So here's just another example. Goal 4, transition services. So if your child is 14 years of age or older, by statute, transition planning needs to be done. Okay. And there's a whole memo and guidance on this issued from September 17th. That we link to, that statutorily requires anyone that is 14 years or older to be having transition planning be part of their child's IEP, part of the child's IEP. Okay. So then we're going on now with transition goals and objectives, employment transition goals of employment, independent living. And
just to jump in here, as a refresher, the IDEA puts the onus on school districts to prepare students with disabilities for further education, employment, and independent living. They are not mutually exclusive. It's not an or situation. So if you have a student who, academically is doing great, but it absolutely has, very low adaptive skills, is not able to manage money or budget or, do laundry or cook for themselves. Those are independent living skills that the school district should be addressing. But it's all part of the same transition purpose, right? It's not just further education. It's all 3: education, employment, and independent living that need to be addressed.
Right. And then we get to the special education and related services section, where you're going to be having the related service, the goal that has been identified. And remember, if we go back up in the slides, each goal and objective at the very bottom of the page ties in the applicable related service that needs to be delivered to implement that goal and objective. All right. You list the duration, the frequency of it, the responsible staff that's providing it, the start date, the end date. What I do like is that it continues to list the site. So this is really for the least restrictive environment purposes. Where are your child's special education and related services going to be delivered on a continuum of LR8? In the gen ed classroom, in the resource room, right? Are they going to be delivered with 50% or more with non-disabled peers, 50% or less than disabled peers, right? You go through this on this page. Supplementary aids and services. This is the this is what we would have known as the accommodations and modifications page. All right, or page 8. Some people would refer to it because it's on page 8. And at the very bottom of page 8, there's a long rectangular box in the current IEP where oftentimes consultation hours are memorialized, and that's where indirect services would be. So let's say you have a private BCBA that you agreed with the district to come in on contract to ensure that the collection of data is being done with fidelity, right? This would state here, BCBA consultation to be, 2 hours per week to ensure IEP implementation. That's where this would be down here. All right. Now, what we've done for you is we've also linked to what the kind of typical vernacular is with accommodations and modifications to your child's IEP that will help to support them by giving them the accommodations that they may need. We're not going to go through all of them, but you should use these when you're thinking about what accommodations and modifications or assistive technology your child may need in order to have their IEP be implemented, right? How do we use these accommodations and modifications to implement a child's goals and objectives? For example, use of fidget toys, preferential seating, use of manipulatives, cueing and prompting, check for understanding, de-escalation strategies, text-to-speech, graphic organizers, adaptive paper, seat cushions, right? Take a look at these because this can really help you. And oftentimes accommodations and modifications are overlooked. Jill, you want to talk about ESY, what that is?
Yeah, actually, if you can get started, I'm responding to a Q&A right now.
Perfect. So ESY, extended school year, there's a standalone page on it in which you discuss both the special education services that your child would be receiving, as well as the related services for extended school year. There's lots of presentations and PowerPoints on what ESY is used for, why you require it, when you should be asking for it. It's really important to understand the purposes of extended school year. Just know that there's a couple standards in which to determine ESY. One standard that districts will only frequently use is whether a child's abilities are going to drop if they're not provided. Okay, are they going to regress? And regression is just one standard. But let's say you have a child with dyslexia and they're almost on grade level on a Fontes and Pinnell literacy benchmark, and they're just emerging into the next grade. Emerging or progressing can also be an ESY standard. So just, there's a lot on ESY, but ESY remains part of the IEP.
And Jeff, I just want to jump in here on the ESY page. And I meant to mention this on the other pages. If you look at the instructional site codes, this is a little bit different from the old IEP where, in the service grid, it would have this, the specific instruction, say writing instruction, and then you'd go across how much, how frequently during the week, who was going to implement it, and then where it was going to take place. And that was often either 1, the general education setting, 2, the resource room. There were a couple other options, a self-contained classroom. So it's interesting that this is slightly different now, and it breaks out a general education setting with 50% or more non-disabled peers or 50% or less non-disabled peers. That is not something that used to be identified in the prior IEP. So I thought that was interesting. Obviously, it still has the resource room. the resource setting and then separate setting or program, again, is a slightly different, description of those two different settings. Related service setting is also now split out. So it used to be resource/related service setting, kind of to indicate it was a pull-out service, but it could take place either or. And now that they're splitting out and they're distinguishing between the resource setting and the related service setting.
Right. They did. Right. You're right on that point, Jill. They took away the self-contained classroom instructional site within CT SEDS. So,
right. Although I would think that the separate setting / program could equally apply to a self-contained classroom or perhaps an outplacement.
Right.
So how districts are going to use that separate setting or program to be designation is, parents should really pay attention to that in terms of their specific child's placement and how it's described on the IEP.
That's correct. That's right. The next section is transportation. Does your child require specialized transportation as a related service? And then they do have to go through 3 subsections of transportation, including what supports they may need on the transportation. Do they need a transportation aid, for example, right? Is there any specialized equipment that your child needs to access transportation, like a ramp, for example, a van handicap ramp? And what are the vehicle requirements? Okay. This goes through the what is the removal time from the gen ed classroom in which they're not being educated with neurotypical peers. And then this is where then the LRE checklist would be conducted after this. And then we go into English language proficiencies. If your child is, if English is not their primary language. Statewide assessments. Is your child participating in statewide assessments? Are they not? If they are participating in statewide assessments, what happened? What accommodations are being done to accommodate their disability so they can successfully navigate through statewide assessments? Okay, again, the same thing here. And then the transfer of rights when your child turns 18. This is when typically it's called the age of majority, when your child's educational rights and to protect them no longer vest with you, the parent, because they're no longer considered a minor. They now vest with the 18-year-old child, unless, of course, you get like conservatorship, or your child agrees to continue to have you represent their educational rights by providing written documentation of that. So what's next? You need to stay involved. You need to know this, okay? It's important that you as the parent are aware of CT SEDS. You need to know what IEP meeting, what planning and placement team meeting your child's IEP is going to migrate over. You need to know your kid's IEP. File a FERPA request based on our recommendations. I hope every district gets flooded with FERPA requests, but again, you want to make sure that you're getting your child's records to make sure that all of the data was migrated correctly, because it's being typed by a human in your district and there could be mistakes. Check the Connecticut State Department of Ed site frequently, because they are providing very good updates on these things. And connect with special education community resources, connect with SpedNet. You know, if you really like this program, drop a few dollars towards SpedNet to help them with doing more of these presentations, okay? Because this is really what it's about. It's supporting the communities in which we live. All right, Jill, I don't know if you want to add anything as well.
Just that this was great. We're so pleased to have the opportunity to present this information to parents. You know, there are tons of resources out there, but certainly use this PowerPoint. Click on the links that are in the PowerPoint. You know, really as a parent, honestly, and you know, the onus is on you to monitor what's happening with your child's IEP, to monitor how the old IEP is turning into the new IEP. Like I said before, to get your documents and compare them. Just honestly, side by side, compare them, and make sure that all of the information has been ported over correctly. If it hasn't, send documentation to your district. Hey, this is incorrect. That's incorrect. Just do those communications, make sure they're part of your child's education record. And, unfortunately, you have to be the vigilant preserver of your child's education and your child's documentation. You can rely on the district to a certain extent, but really it's up to you as the parent to make sure that things are correct and being done appropriately.
Thank you, guys. This was really incredible. Sorry, everybody, that we ran over, but it seems like almost everybody hung in there, which is pretty incredible. Thank you. One other thing on our website, keeping up to date on our homepage, we also have and have had for a long time the new IEP form, training modules, side-by-side comparisons, and updated list of accommodation modifications and assistive technology. So you can also go there, as well as we will, as we always do, we send out copies of the videos from the webinars. You'll have it by the end of the week. Feel free to share it with your spouse, your team, whoever you think would benefit from it. And it also will be on our website probably tomorrow under speakers, under topics, and under recent presentations. So it's really easy to get to. Thank you. It was just an incredible amount of information that we really needed to get out to parents.
Our pleasure. Thank you for having us, Eve.
Thanks, everybody.
And I just want everyone to know that I think all questions have been answered. So
oh, wait a minute. There's just a few actually popping up.
I think they're
they're all thank yous.
Yeah,
that's great. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Jill, for doing that. That was extraordinarily helpful for us.
Sure. My pleasure.
Okay. Bye all.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.